This is Midnight Chats, Series 1 of our recently created podcast here at Loud and Quiet. This is episode 3, and if you're returning after the first 2 episodes, thank you very much for listening. Our first guest on episode 1 was David Bowie from The Invisible, and episode 2 we welcomed in Chani from Polisa. Both really, really interesting people to speak to, and those podcasts are still available on Acast and iTunes and SoundCloud and Facebook if you want to go back and listen to those ones. If you're listening for the first time, welcome along. Thank you for joining us. You'll find us on loudandquiet.com too, and leave us a review wherever you're listening if you like what you hear. It's called Midnight Chats, and the idea is quite a simple one, really. We feel that often the most revealing, interesting and relaxed conversations happen late at night, and we are interviewing a series of musicians that we admire and that we think are interesting. My guest for this episode 3 was writer, poet, actor, musician and activist Saul Williams. I met Saul a few weeks ago, back in February. Now, if you're familiar with Saul, he's the kind of guy you can listen to all day. His delivery and his eloquent thoughts on life are very magnetic, make for a really kind of interesting listening. And we chatted about a whole range of things, including his musical upbringing, living with a Japanese family in Brazil, the influence of David Bowie on his career, and how he felt when he found out about David Bowie's passing, the time he spent in Senegal and Gambia, the power of people, the value and the danger of social media. It was a pretty varied chat that even got onto things like the state of current hip-hop, and he was name-checking people like Kendrick Lamar and Lady Lashur. So I won't tell you too much more, I'll just let you listen. Later on in the podcast, you'll hear there's a slight interruption to us chatting, which is when a group of buskers kind of came into where we were recording, which was quite funny and kind of appropriate when you listen to the moment in the conversation that we had. So I'm going to shut up and let you enjoy this conversation that I had with Saul Williams. I started by asking him about his most recent album, which is called Martyr, Loser, King. It's his 5th album, 15 years into this amazing music career that he's had. And I wanted to know, what is it that motivates him to still be making music 5 albums down the line, and why is it that he still loves what he does?
I think you get closer and closer to what you aim to hear, and learning how to execute that. You kind of build your chops and you get better as you go, and you're able to apply more and more of what you understand. I mean, the difference between being a performance artist and a recording artist, for example, is something that was large for me, like learning the nuances of those differences, of being someone who comes from theater and knows how to project, and suddenly not needing that in front of a microphone unless it's desired, a wanted dynamic. And so learning, how to control those levers between dynamics and what have you, and to move through that. I mean, like if you listen to Amethyst Rockstar, I'm screaming on a lot of songs, primarily because I'm used to performing out, and the opportunity to record is different. Like I heard Coded Language today, and someone played it and I was forced to be in the room. You know what I'm saying? And I was like, wow, I'm screaming, like I'm standing on a street corner screaming. And I understand that's because before then I had been standing on a corner screaming, but I hadn't paid attention to the fact that there was a mic there, meaning I could whisper. It's all detected and undetected nuances, that you learn to appreciate more and more, subtleties, subtleties in songwriting, subtleties in narrative, subtleties in life. And it's like, developing your palate of taste. You start to appreciate different teas or different tastes or different, and the nuance of those, you know, flavors and spices.
Talking about musical palettes, take me back to those first influences. You know, you were in your teenage years, you were almost exclusively into hip hop, right? So what was the first?
Well, up until I was like 16, right? There were two things that I got, because my dad was a minister, so I got gospel, and gospel was fresh. Like there was a lot of innovation going on in gospel at that time. But it, you know, although I wasn't averse to pumping it, I was like, you know, like a lot, you know, so many rappers identify as Christian. As a teenager, I was in that move, and I questioned it, but I was still, you know, I allowed the music to whatever, but what I was really into was hip hop, and so I was in the thick of it. I was in New York, and so I was really like hearing everything new as soon as it came out, and feeling the excitement of being around the birth of an art form and participating in that by rapping and breakdancing. And I never really did graffiti, but, you know, I was definitely there on many other wavelengths, particularly as a rapper and dancer. I was in it. And then when I was 16, I moved to Brazil. And I was an exchange student, but school was on strike when I arrived there. And I brought a few albums with me, you know, like It Takes a Nation of Millions and, I don't know, some rock hymn. You know, I had stuff with me, but I quickly ran out of music and had to procure music there. And the first thing, of course, I encountered was Brazilian music. And when I heard Olodum, I heard those drums. I realized that, of course, every place that has had, you know, enslaved Africans, what have you, they hold those retentions differently. So the music expresses itself, the art expresses itself differently. And I started listening to that music and getting into the samba drums and the bossa nova rhythms and all this stuff. But like with Olodum, it's really hard drums. And I just started exploring, you know. So while living there, I encountered a lot of other teenagers, exchange students from around the world, aside from Brazilian kids. So on top of discovering a lot of Brazilian music at that time, which was Brazilian, like hip-hop hadn't really arrived, but there was Brazilian punk that I was really into. Like, it was the first time I ever listened to punk, and I'd be at a concert and the whole place would be screaming like, "Polícia para quem precisa, polícia para quem precisa de polícia," which is like, you know, fuck the police. And then in the bars every night there would be there'd always be someone playing acoustic guitar and someone else on percussion, and it's funny, I traveled all over the country. Every bar I went to, they would always play, have someone singing David Bowie songs in Portuguese. And the whole bar would kind of sing along. It was always live music, and they'd always end up arriving at these like Brazilian translations of songs like Starman and Rebel Rebel. And that's actually the first time I encountered that album, Ziggy Stardust, was hearing it in Portuguese. I didn't know I was listening to David Bowie. I didn't know they were singing covers. I noticed it with other songs, like they would sing like Sorry by Tracy Chapman in Portuguese, or they would always sing Pink Floyd, We Don't Need No Education, but in English. And the whole place would be like, "Hey, teacher," you know, like there was this real like vibrant musical bar culture with the percussion and the Brazilian sense of timing and rhythm. It was always really fresh to me. So I spent a lot of time in bars. But then through other exchange students, I encountered people like Sinead O'Connor, Morrissey. I also went out and bought stuff that I knew about, but I'd never taken the time to listen to. So I remember I had this James Brown Live at the Apollo album. I got all this Bob. It's the first time I really listened to Bob Marley. I started like normally, but like Bob Marley Legend, you know, like all this stuff. But I'm 16 and I'm starting to listen to stuff other than hip hop, and it's getting heavy rotation. I discovered like the U2 album War. In fact, I lived with a family. At one point, for 6 months, I lived with a Japanese family there, and they were well off. They owned sugarcane plantations, and at that time, a lot of the cars in Brazil were running on alcohol that came from sugarcane.
Right.
They had a room in their house where they had speakers built into the wall. They had a whole stereo built into the wall, and that room was my bedroom.
Right. This is modern for this point as well.
Yeah,
it's quite
super
futuristic.
modern. Yeah, it's really futuristic, you know. And that's the bedroom they gave me. I mean, they had intercoms in all the rooms and like birds trapped in walls with microphones, so you could hear birds singing throughout the house if you turned on the intercom. It was strange stuff, and I stayed in this room with this stereo, this, you know, record player, cassette, CD, everything. And so I started getting a lot of music just to hear it in that room, because it was like a soundproof room. I could blast music in there and like jump on the bed and hear everything. So I discovered like everything from like U2 War to like, you know, I would go back over that Public Enemy stuff. I translated all that stuff into Portuguese and Sade albums into Portuguese and got deep into the Brazilian stuff. Then I lived through Carnival and heard those drums live. It really woke me up musically.
These are like hugely formative years in terms of development of your diverse taste, I guess.
Yeah. That first Terence Trent D'Arby album came out while I was there. Like I said, Sinead O'Connor, New Order.
Because it's interesting, South America really embraced British music, particularly Britpop. Even now, like, you have bands like Blur, or if Noel Gallagher goes to Brazil, they play huge shows. There's still a huge passion for British independent indie music from the 80s and the 90s.
And the world really responded to that.
Yeah, totally.
But yeah, because I've discovered those things were popular at home too, but I was too wrapped up in hip-hop to really pay attention to other stuff before I arrived there, and I had so much time on my hands.
I'm interested to know, how were you personally affected by the passing of David Bowie? Because obviously he's an artist whose music meant an awful lot to you, but equally you've referenced him throughout your career as well.
Yeah, well, I guess I'll just tell you what happened to me that night. You know, I was working on a treatment for an idea related to Martin Luther King, you know, and so I was like sitting at a table, and for some reason I looked at like socials, and you know, and I saw a friend tweet something like, "Yo, this Bowie album," because it had just come out that week.
Black Star,
like Black Star is amazing, and I'd already listened to it. I listened to it a few times, like the day it came out. I was like, I want to hear that. So I played it. I put it on, and then that same friend, it's DJ Peabody, who's like Flying Lotus's DJ, right? He emailed me about his podcast, and I wrote him back saying, "Yo," you know, because he didn't know I had read his tweet and that I was listening to Bowie as a result. So I was like, I texted him back, "Where the fuck did Monday go?" Because I was listening to that song, "Girls Love Me," and I'd listened to that song like 3 or 4 times in a row. I love that song on the album, you know, "Girls Love Me," and then the chorus is, "Where the fuck did Monday go?" And so I just texted him back that, like, "Where the fuck did Monday go?" So then I'm back to writing, and the album ends. I play it again. I listened to it twice. And I'm really in a Bowie mood then. So then I put on Heroes. So I'm on Spotify. And I'm like, holy shit, everything is here. You know what I'm saying? I was like, I feel like listening to Heroes now. So I put on Heroes, and halfway through the album, my wife comes downstairs crying. And she's like, "Did you hear?" I'm like, "What?" She's like, "Bowie, he's dead." And she's crying hysterically. I'm like, "What?" And I look on my computer, and sure enough, you know, I hadn't been paying attention, and so, like, sure enough, it's all over the place, and so I play her that song because it's Sunday night. It's Sunday night, you know, and so I'm like, "What?" She was like, "I thought that's why you were playing." I was like, "No, I had no idea." I was like, "But this, did you hear what I was playing again? Did you hear this?" And I played "The Girls Love Me," and with him going, "Where the fuck did Monday go?" And we just, you know, we're there, like, feeling him, you know. So yeah, it was enormous. It was touching.
Talking about your relationship with hip hop, my first introduction to Saul Williams was your self-titled second record in 2004. I'd read a review online. I was like, this sounds like my bag. Went out and bought the record and listened to it religiously. And there's a track on there, Telegram, that people might know. And I think it's got a powerful message in there about hip-hop, and you talk a lot about hip-hop, about it. You reference the fact that, you know, it's lying on the sidewalk and it's not necessarily in the greatest of health.
Right. It's lying on the side of the road dead,
Yeah, and how, 12 years later, how is hip-hop? Is it all better? Is it well again?
Well, you know, the thing that you should understand about my critique of hip-hop when I'm reciting a poem or singing a song is that I do it really as a rapper critiquing the game. Like, it's I really come from the land of braggadocio as a rapper, and I made a transition when I started writing poetry, when I stopped bragging about myself and started bragging about us and our connection to the whole, and which put me in a position to be able to also, you know, critique and look at things, you know, and so it's the critique of a rapper saying, what y'all doing is whack, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's so it's not always, which is a part of the culture of hip hop, you know, is to, like, nobody can do it like this, you know, this sort of thing. But it's true. I mean, other than that, I would say that I was critiquing the industry. There's always been many styles of rappers, you know what I'm saying? But what the industry might choose to pay attention to for the sake of, you know, consumerism and packaging and all this stuff, you know, it's like any other form of entertainment that, you know, in some cycles, in some points in the cycle, it's the dumbed down thing that becomes popular, you know, where it's the gangster thing or the sex-driven thing or the escape, which is all parts of life and have their place and have their rightful place in any, you know, cycle. So sometimes I'm just frustrated because I feel like it's not evolving quickly enough, you know, like it's not moving quickly enough, but everything has its place.
Yeah. Does it feel like we're in that moment right now? Because I think in 2004, maybe hip-hop had reached a moment where it was sort of dumbed down and there was kind of a
not everybody, right? I mean, there was still, like, Outkast. There was a lot of cool stuff, but it's true that that a lot of the commercial stuff quite simply wasn't all to my taste, even though I might like the beat. You know what I'm saying? I felt like there was always just a critique on my end of, like, wanting to hear. I mean, people were starting to do interesting things. I can't remember what I was listening to then, but I know there was always fresh stuff, and I know there was also a lot of great stuff happening in other genres, and sometimes, you know, other genres have all the juice, you know, so you move around, you know, like I think at that time I might have been listening to, like, the Mars Volta or something, you know, where I was like, this is where the real stuff is happening, you know, so I just wasn't that concerned, but I don't know, maybe that's not accurate. Maybe I was listening to, like, T.I. mixtapes as well. I mean, I'm not really sure what I was listening to fully. I know that what I was getting into and what that album reflects really is, and that song in particular, is how much Bad Brains I was listening to. And so that album, you know, the self-titled album, really reflects what I was trying to hear.
What's your relationship like now with hip-hop? Do you kind of, like, do you check in on it? Do you just,
I'm in it big time. You know what I'm saying? I've always stayed in it, but I don't know if that was the main thing I was bumping then. Right now, I probably bump it more than anything else, but what I'm really inspired by is a lot of the, like, beat makers, you know? A lot of the lyrical stuff that I encounter. I mean, there are exceptions. There are people that I like anyone from, say, a Lil Sims to an Azealia Banks to a Earl Sweatshirt, you know, I also like someone like a Young Thug sometimes, you know what I'm saying, where the melody and the idea is so fresh stylistically that, you know, I'm not even thinking about, I listen to it like a foreigner, like I don't understand the language, but I like the placement of the voice, you know what I'm saying, all that. There's tons of fresh stuff that's, and there's other stuff where I listen where I think it's clever. Like, there's someone here, Lady Lashur, who does stuff. Yeah, you know what I'm saying? There's all types of stuff that I think is fresh. But what I'm really moved by are a lot of the beat makers, a lot of the more instrumental stuff that's popping off in terms of footwork and trap and electronic. And those are probably the cats that are really, like, that I feel like are really bringing it, where I challenge someone to put, to find the right lyrics that belong with that beat. You know what I'm saying? Like there's stuff like that, which is, a spin out of electronic music culture and Dilla culture and all of that stuff. Like it's, I think I've been on to that in terms of hip hop right now, but I listen to everything, and like, so we could talk about Kendrick or any of that stuff, and I think but that reflects that movement. Like that's the thing, is that Kendrick is in LA, where a lot of this fresh beat making and like the sort of attention that's being paid to music with people like Kamasi Washington or like Thundercat, those guys are interesting. There's a movement going on there, Flying Lotus, all that stuff. There's something, the Brain Feeder Crew, the Low End Theory, Gaslamp Killer, Nobody, Daedalus, Monopoly, Flacco, Thavius Beck. There's a lot of cats that are doing interesting stuff out there. And there's also, the Odd Future and the internet and all those stuff that are all there. It's a lot of interesting stuff happening there. And so I check for that the same way I'll check for, the more, like drill rap shit out of Chicago or anything like that. I'm energized by it, big time. But, there's some things that I feel are like redundant or flawed or predictable or just so removed from its own possibility that it's exhausting, And the pop stuff, I think, pretty much reflects a lot of the ideas that have gone pop right now, which are like, big asses and a lot of like disconnected, but connected, disillusioned, big ass shit, and stuff where people, the remnants of those who think the dumb down is necessary, but there's also a progressive movement like, Kendrick and even more pop acts, who are pushing against that.
I wanted to talk about the influence of like location on music, because you are, comparatively speaking, a very well-travelled guy. You've moved, you've visited lots of different continents and and observed cultures and taken on influence musically and otherwise. So, I mean, in more recent times, you lived in Paris whilst you were making some of this record. What was the experience of living in a city like that? Because Paris has, in many ways, become the kind of centre of a lot of the social, economic issues facing Europe at the moment. So what did you take away from that experience?
Well, Paris is particular also because of the Arab and African communities that are there, and like London as well, and Eastern. There's so many different people living in Paris, and the musical palette is rich. I was really inspired in simple ways, by just the laissez-faire of the culture of like at 6 p.m. like it's time for a glass of wine and to stop talking about work or whatever, and the great conversation and the engagement globally with what's going on around, and I enjoyed it, and I carried a lot of that with me. It was nice. It was nice to discover that. I think it's cool to like shift reference points every now and then, and to look at also where you're from the outside and all of those things. So that was wonderful to have that sense of removal and detachment. But even before I was able to travel, I was traveling through literature and through theater. Those were the first times I really went any place, was when I had to explore a character or an idea or some culture foreign from mine, just in the story that was being told. And that's how I first gained an appreciation for travel, was through reading, as I was living in a small town outside of New York City, wishing I could travel.
There's some time when you rock up to a place that almost feels familiar already?
Some places, I remember the first time I was in Senegal, and I had already been to Jamaica, and I arrived in Senegal and the Gambia, And everywhere I would walk, there'd be like Bob Marley portraits, murals, and like taxis would pass by blasting Bob Marley, and I had to keep reminding myself that I wasn't in Jamaica. I spent a lot more time there, like, for example, while I was living in Paris. And because the first time I went was in the 90s. But this time I spent months there, and wow, like any place, if you're able to spend time, not any place, of course, but every place has its nuance, and the nuances of Senegal and the beauty and nobility of that culture and language and food and dress and music and drum, like its voice, it's rich and peaceful. Even though I was there when the Anamar, standing up to their president at the time, Wade, who was trying to extend his time in office, and the students took to the streets and started burning cars and stuff. I was there when that went down, just like I was in the Gambia years before when they had a coup d'etat. I got to experience a few interesting things.
Those situations you just described are kind of on the edge. They're kind of at the front line of... how do you feel when you're in the center of some of those situations?
Well, it depends, In those situations I was just describing, even in Paris, it's different when you're not from there. And you feel it, but it's not yours. I was just recently living in New York. And while all this police brutality started, bubbling, and I was there when Eric Garner was killed and all this, and felt the wave of energy and proximity. And in New York, I feel like that, wait a minute, this is where I'm from. Like, I feel a different sense of entitlement and authority there. And so I was out in the streets, like, I don't know, police, whatever, like what, like there's a different thing that I felt. Of course, I think it's true also that we can and do feel those ways and that connection to movements in all types of places. It doesn't just have to be where we're from. But yeah, there's a certain potency when it occurs, in a place that you're from, and you really know your every right and your need to stand up and speak out and confront. That's powerful. But yeah, in the other places, you kind of just witness, like in both cases, for example, in Senegal and in the Gambia, I remember like us being kind of scurried through the road and like, stay out of this, even though you may be in agreement with the movement. In the case of Senegal, you're in agreement with the students, but I don't really speak the language, and there's no reason for me to burn cars or throw bricks. I'm observing and like, yeah.
Throughout your work as a musician, as an author, as a poet, on a daily basis, how do you in what lens do you kind of like observe the world? Like, what are your regular activities? Where do you get your information?
It's not so much the websites that you trust. It's always a matter of being able to read between the lines, to be able to tell. Like, I remember the moment in just literature, the point where I realized that perhaps I was getting more truth from fiction than I was from autobiography. Because memories are selective, but the things that people reveal, like I think of like reading Alice Walker, for example, something like something called Temples of My Familiar or Possessing the Secrets of Joy, and she would do an enormous amount of research. Let's say in Possessing the Secrets of Joy, it's about female circumcision, right? But she's telling a story that encounters these realities and ideas that are real, but she's creating a fiction, and the attention she would pay to the human character and to all the different aspects of this story was rich enough for me to learn a lot. Not only a lot about her writing, but a lot of factual stuff that I could deduce from the writing. And then another time I may read a journalist or someone who's writing a factual book about, genital female mutilation and female genital mutilation, and they may leave something out because they're trying to make a point. And so things that are not useful to the point they're trying to make may get left out because, and if you know more of the reality, you may say, yeah, but you're not mentioning this or these reasons or that this is in such close proximity. It depends on the writer. It depends on the situation. But I believe that fiction, science fiction, magical realism, all of these things can be as grounded in the truth as someone who's claiming to tell it to you. And so in terms of news and what sites I visit, I try I float around things, that I know a lot of people are reading, and also things that I encounter through my own individual browsing.
Yeah.
And reading the stuff that a lot of other people might encounter, whether that's a BBC or a New York Times or Huffington Post or Rue 99 or whatever, Electronic Intifada, whatever these things are, you read these things and you go, okay, but you also dissect where it's being written from and what side.
Just thinking about where the motivations come from, or just thinking about the balance of...
Well, when you go through that, I mean... that process keeps the wheels spinning, and you take that and you multiply it by a meal and a song that sticks out and an idea in that song or a beat that that catches you. You're like, wow, that's amazing. It could be simple. It could be a car passing by playing like Drake, Worst Behavior, and you're like, you hear that passing, motherfuckers never loved us. You're like, what is that? That's
Yeah.
So you listen to it. You know what I'm saying? It can be as simple as that. It can be as complex as someone, talking to you about, some Japanese dancer they saw, who had like wires connected to their iPad that made, and you go on that YouTube trail or whatever, and then there's a book and a conversation and you go for a hike and you see an animal, and any of these things are there for... the process. All those things are inspiring. All of those things. And so then what? If I feel like writing, if I'm moved by, something where an epiphany or an idea or something, hits.
That's amazing. Just like that. There's that
Just
epiphany.
like that, Sometimes it rises up like that. And so you rush and you record or write it down. It's like that.
Music comes from surprising places.
Yeah, Right.
We're going to keep that in, by the way.
Yeah, go for it. I don't think we have a choice.
No, exactly. I was going to ask about the power of social media. Are you a big supporter of the voice that social media can give to individuals?
Yeah. Well, I think that the connection that we're able to forge through social media can be likened to the sort of connection that the youth movement sort of made, let's say in the late 60s when the proliferation of like drug culture started happening and people started connecting on a particular label and started just like looking at each other going, yeah, man, fuck the system. Like that sort of waking up and just like, dude, we got to give peace a chance and standing up against wars. You look at the social movements that were quelled by the powers that be during that time, and they were happening all over the place. There were revolutions in France and there were rebellions and riots across America. There were so many things, Vietnam, there were all these things going on, and there were also so many people, more so than had been for a long time, going, yo, nah, big government, big corporate, whatever they were that they were standing up against. You found youth standing up against, and not just youth, but people standing up against the establishment, right? Mm-hmm. And suddenly we have another moment of connection that this time is virtual as opposed to psychedelic, let's say. And it's happening again, and I think it scares the power. And so when you have a Arab Spring or a WikiLeaks or an Anonymous, all of the Black Lives Matter, you have all of these people that are able to mobilize, oftentimes even without a leader, which makes it even crazier for the power, because it used to be that they could kill, the main representative of a certain idea or ideal and begin to quell or transform the movement. They've worked at that. And so now when you have leaderless movements, it can be a method of outsmarting the system. Of course, there has to be, I mean, you look at the Arab Spring and then you look at something like military eventually taking over. That's the flip side of that narrative of when there has to be something that anticipates the obstacles to come. And because, I mean, that's what we face now with like militarized police and private security forces and all this stuff. Like there's always the risk of this other sort of takeover, you know, because people are invested in various values and ideals, right? But those of us who are thinking in terms of, you know, a non-violent upliftment of humanity and a true sense of democracy globally, you know, beyond national borders and within all of our hearts, you know. Yeah, that we're forced to be clever about achieving that.
Is there a flip side to that social media coin, in the sense that people put a lot of themselves out there, project a lot of their own kind of personal identities? Is there any, do you have any reservations about that, or you see it?
Of course. I mean, tons, like anybody else, you know, you see people in social media where, you know, they're writing or revealing one thing or another, and I get it. You know, people are excited about that connection and excited to not be alone. I personally still value being alone with certain thoughts and ideas, you know. I'm not opposed to the idea of transparency. There's really nothing to hide. But, you know, I think of the idea of conducting or producing or directing or composing, you know, and in that sense, you know, I see it as a tool that we can play with. But I still like, you know, the dry ice on the stage and that sense of, you know.
One step removed.
Yeah, I enjoy it, you know, but you do see people who are very present. And sometimes in amazing ways, you're like, wow, how'd you learn to do that? How you learn to be so comfortable talking to the camera or what have you? And it's not necessarily that it would be something you would choose to do. Mm-hmm. You know, like these are, you know, you do find people finding themselves there. And you also find people losing themselves there, as is evidence, you know, that, like we said, we could go back to drug culture.
In terms of your achievements so far, you've made 5 albums, you've written 5 books, you've starred on Broadway recently as well. Where do your ambitions lie? Do you still have ambitions to do other things, or do you kind of wait for your ambitions to just kind of arrive and then you go to meet them?
I'm looking forward to directing my first film. Yeah, which is Martin Luther King is part of the soundtrack to that film. There's another, there's other levels to the project. It's multimedia in that there's a graphic novel that comes out a year from now that tells, you know, the story of, that this is based around, and there's another collection of music that belongs to that story that will come with that. And I've recently, I even initially conceived it as a play, as a musical. And that idea became filmic. And so now I'm looking at that. And so, yeah, we'll see. You know, like it's always a fight to be able to, you know, find funding even.
To create,
you know,
to budgets.
All that stuff, you know. So that's the goal right now. That's what I'm doing. I'm still very much in the Martin Luther King world because, like I said, I'm still working on the graphic novel. There's other music. I shared some of the music that belongs to the project, but there's a world. It's a parallel universe, and there's a whole world of sound that's just it's exciting to share, but it's also exciting to like pace myself or be paced by the process.
And just finally, I wanted to finish by wishing you a happy birthday, because it's your birthday at the end of the month.
Yep, exactly. I turn 11.
Yeah, this is it. Yep. So for people that don't know, you've got your birthday
February 29th.
February 29th.
Leap year, so it's every 4 years. I've had 10 birthdays thus far, and so I'm about to have my 11th.
Do you do something extra special when a leap year comes around?
It's not so much that I do something extra special, but whenever a leap year has come around, special things seem to be, there's always a certain like synergistic relation perhaps that one might feel in connection, like around the time of their birth. Perhaps, at least, that's how it is for me. And I feel that even when it's not a leap year, like I like the month of February, for example. There's stuff like that. And yeah, that day has always been special. Of course it would. I mean, I don't get it every year.
No. Do you normally celebrate it on the 28th or on the 1st of March?
Oh, like I think, if you think about it, like the month you're born in is always particular. And so I could never like celebrate in March because I'm born during the month of February. And so, but no, I celebrate it. You mean when there's not a leap year?
Yeah.
I take the entire month. Yeah.
Good for you.
Yeah, if I take my day, I take the month. That's how it works.
Absolutely, good man. So there you go. That was our midnight chat with Saul Williams. We hope you enjoyed listening as much as we enjoyed talking to Saul. He's a fascinating guy, and we hope he had a really great birthday. If you're interested in listening to episode 1 and 2 of Midnight Chats, they're still available. Those were our conversations that we had with Dave Akumu from The Invisible and Chani from Polisa. You'll find them on Acast and iTunes, SoundCloud, Facebook, YouTube, and on loudandquiet.com. So thank you very much for listening. If you want to get in touch, do let us know what you think, like any comments, good or bad, and do tell us who you might want us to have on Midnight Chats, and we'll try our very best to arrange it. So thanks very much again for listening. We hope you enjoyed episode 3 with Saul Williams, and there will be a new one from us very soon. Thanks again.